Everyone, I hope we're well. It's a beautiful sunny day outside, and it certainly feels good. It certainly feels like spring. I feel alive, and I'm really enjoying the nice weather. I'm really enjoying the time of year that we have. Last talk we talked about sort of Palm Sunday and about Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and we talked about the tension it created. And really what happens as Jesus spends those days in Jerusalem just before sort of the main events of Easter in what we call Holy Week, there is a lot of tension rising. And we often see the tension. We see the tension between Jesus and the temple authorities. He clears the temple because they've turned the Gentile court, the area where the outsiders would supposed to come and meet God. They turned it into a market. So the outsiders were not being able to do what they wanted to do. And I think that's important to understand God's attitude here. But the tensions were rising because he was insulting and he was threatening the established order because he was bringing in God's new order. And we know that the days of the temple here are numbered and that Jesus himself is becoming the temple, which is, after all, what Christianity is all about and the core of our belief. But there was also a sort of slight rising of tensions amongst him and his disciples as well. And as we sort of enter into the Last Supper, which is the sort of next scene where we're going to read from the Bible today, we suddenly sort of see a little bit of this tension rising between Peter with Jesus, Judas with Jesus, and we also see the dynamic between Jesus and John, where there is perhaps less tension, but we see a dynamic of love. But what we see here is a very interesting incident, and I want to just turn to John 13, which is an incident about feet, and we'll talk a little bit about feet in a second. But John 13 is the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And I'm just going to read a little bit out the NIV Bible for us now. This is John 13, starting with verse 1. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave the world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying with the towel he wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus said, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you shall have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath only need wash his feet. His whole body is clean." I just want to leave it there, but we know the story. He goes on, he washes the feet, and then after that, in the second part of John 13, because there's 3 parts to this chapter, if you like, he talks about the fact he's going to be betrayed. And then at the end of it, when Simon Peter is saying, "I will not let this happen," he drops a bombshell on Simon Peter and says to Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times. And we know how the story unfolds. But it's this sort of attitude of Peter that I just want to sort of think a little bit about today. Because Peter, if you like, to me represents how we are, how good disciples are. And it's that sometimes our attitude to what Jesus is doing can sometimes become a barrier and can sometimes cause us to misunderstand what God is doing. And I think at an exciting time like this, it's very important that we sort of get our focus on God and listen to what he's saying. I think Paul Simon Peter, he gets a bad press in the Bible, but I think he serves an excellent purpose in sort of reflecting the attitude of those who are sold on Jesus, those who want to do his will. But then sometimes we need to subtly sort of understand exactly what it is we're being asked to do. And it serves well because in the incident of Peter and Cornelius in in Acts, where Peter goes to the Romans, Peter, by listening and being sensitive to God, having learnt the lessons that are here, actually transforms the world. And I mean totally transforms the world. We can never underestimate how important it was that Peter took the word to the Gentiles in a way that it was accepted. I know God would have done things otherwise anyway, but the fact of the matter is, we see here perhaps the seeds of Peter learning that lesson here and beginning to understand when it comes to the thing about washing feet. So why is washing feet such an important thing? Well, just remember, back in those times, there was no such thing as a sewage system, and transport was by animals. Now, my daughter rides horses, and the pooper scooper is an incredibly important piece of equipment. Horses make quite a mess. So do camels, so do sheep, so there's everything else that goes up and down. And not only that, of course, when a human being did their business, there wasn't a toilet to flush it down or anything else. That probably went out in the streets as well. So you can imagine, however clean you are, however well bathed you are, the fact is that the moment you walked out your front door, you were going to get dirty. And I think perhaps sometimes here we need to really think about our perception, because Pope Benedict in his book on Holyrood makes the point that basically having the bath is the same as being baptized. But in our day-to-day living with our feet, we get dirty and we need to constantly wash our feet, or have our feet washed by the Lord, because he forgives our sins. Because no matter what we do, where we go, the moment we get out, bits of the world rub off on us. And there's a lot of truth in that. But I want us to sort of take that a little bit further and think about the fact that basically every day things do wash us. But it's not just about sin. Because sometimes we get a little bit focused too much on sin, and we forget actually there's other attitudes and other things that are always washing on us, washing all over us. I was thinking back to my days in the city, very much when I used to work in one of the sort of busiest, biggest dealing rooms. And anyone who's watched The Wolf of Wall Street, you see at the beginning when he starts his first job, and he goes into a huge dealing room in the city, and he makes this comment about the language. And there's a lot of truth in that. I remember being a senior broker in my sort of late 20s, and I was sort of in charge of the last bit of the day, if you like. Everyone else, all the other senior guys are gone. I was left there with a few juniors, and they had some other guys turning up from another bank. And I just listened to them talking, and I must admit, I think I got through about 50, 60 words, and I thought, over half the words these guys have said are expletives. They were excited, they were talking, but the language was awful. And I thought, you know what, I used to have to struggle in my 20s with that language washing off on me. And I think, yes, things wash off on us. And I think, yes, that washes off on us, because what you are exposed to gets us dirty. So all the muck of the day gets onto us. And so we have this thing where the washing of the feet was an extremely important job, because it's about hygiene. It's about the fact that when you're reclining at the table, your feet may be furthest from you. But the fact is that at some stage they will still need to be washed, because after all, what you've trodden in those days was a lot worse than what we would have trodden in, and it would have got in your toes. And I think, you didn't have warm soapy water either. Jesus didn't wash them with warm soapy water. It was with cold water out of a basin. No soap involved either. So I think this was a really unpleasant job for someone to have to do, and it was a really lonely job. But the funny thing is that where we do see feet mentioned in the Bible, feet is what we put our sandals on. And when we think of the armour of God, it's about how we take the good news out. We can do as much with our brain as we want, but it's our feet that do the walking. And I often think that, when I'm older now, I remember trying to play football about 10, 15 years ago, and my poor feet were not as fast as my brain. There's been a difference between the speed of my feet now and my brain. And the problem is however much my brain wants to be somewhere, if my feet aren't there, then I can't go there. So that is very, very important to understand this concept, that our feet are very important. And in fact, the funny thing is that our feet, Jesus washing the disciples' feet in chapter 13 contrasts brilliantly with chapter 12, where we see Jesus having his feet washed in perfume and in nard. It's almost a wonderful comparison. Jesus is having a feast just before entering Jerusalem with Lazarus, his friend who he'd raised from the dead. And what happens? He gets his feet washed with perfume, and he absolutely loves it, and he takes it very seriously. This is very good. And then a chapter later in the Bible, we see the opposite, Jesus washing people's feet. Now, if we know that Jesus thought the washing of the feet was so important because of the way he received it, and he received it obviously knowing more than the people around him, then we need to understand that actually allowing ourselves to have our feet washed by Jesus today is equally very important. Because it's not just an act of service, it's an act of actually saying to Jesus, I want to listen to what you want to say to me in these circumstances. It was so out of culture that the head of the table, the host, the main man, should be the one to wash the feet, when it was the job of the servant. But it was such an example of God's self-giving love that it was really important. And the funny thing is that Peter struggled with Jesus washing his feet. He then asked for the whole thing, but Jesus says, no, I'm going to do it my way. And then we see the situation with Peter. He fails in the garden when he chops the servant's ear off. He fails when he denies God. And the thing with Peter is that he still had an understanding of Jesus, and he had an understanding of Messiah that was slightly different to Jesus' plan. His idea was that Jesus would conquer and be exalted. Jesus' idea of victory was a self-giving love to the point of the cross, and then absolutely to the point of resurrection behind it. Because at the cross, in human eyes, nothing else can happen after death. But Jesus showed us even after death, there is the resurrection. And he gave us that example. But Peter could not see that. Peter was still trying to do things, reckoning with his own logic. And I think a part of this story here is that we've got to sort of sometimes sit back and say, God, I can't see it. I can't understand it. I don't know what's going on, but Lord, I want you to show me the way. And I know that these are well-worn words, and I know that people would have heard them so many times. But I just feel the Lord is saying very strongly that as we come out of this season, as we change in the world, as we change, and as we head into Easter, which is the time of a great celebration, that actually I'm really saying to us today, and for this period, sit down and listen to me. Let me wash your feet again. If you are struggling with things, if you cannot see my plan, if what you think I want to have happen is something you don't want to see happen, let me wash your feet. Let me wash off the thoughts that you've picked up by walking in the street. You know, we don't deliberately go out and sin, and I think this is much more than sin. This is about the thoughts we pick up, and it's not just about bad thoughts, it's not just about bad language, it's about ways of thinking, it's about what we expect to see happen. Because what we expect to see happen might not be what God has in mind. And we have to be ready for the fact that God is going to surprise us, because actually God is an habitual surpriser. We don't have to read the Bible very much to know that he habitually surprises people. And he always surprises by exceeding the expectations. He very, very rarely disappoints. In fact, I really can't think of many cases where he disappoints. He normally exceeds, but it will often happen. And often that exceeding will come through times of sadness, and it will come through times of trial, as it did in this story. You know, at the end of the day, on the day after the crucifixion, at the moment of the crucifixion, everything seemed lost. It was only the day of resurrection that everything comes to light. And quite often we find ourselves looking at looking sad bits, looking at the bad bits. And those are times when we have to say, Lord, please wash my feet here. I want to give up my understanding and exchange it for your understanding. I want to take away and let you wash my feet, even though it seems like the strangest thing to do. I want to put my thoughts behind me. I want to put my thoughts to one side. I want to put my hopes and my expectations, and I want to say, show me how your self-giving love works in this. And it may be that he's asking us to do things in service that perhaps we didn't feel we wanted to do. But it may be that we're being told to give something up that we don't want to give up. It could be that he's saying he understands our stress, and maybe one of the things about our stress is that we take too much on ourselves and we don't hand it over. I would have to say that this is something that the Lord has taught me over the years, is that you can become very stressed, you can take on lots of responsibility, wear lots of mentors. But actually, guarding your own mental health and guarding your own welfare is as important sometimes just to remember to take them off and hand them over sometimes. Because we can otherwise end up stressing ourselves over things that we shouldn't be stressing. Carrying the sword to fight a battle, but God hasn't called us to fight that way, but he's called us to actually just watch Jesus in his self-giving love. And so I just want to pray that today is a day when we will just say, Lord, you know what? Everything is yours. Please come. I will let you wash my feet. Even though this is your self-giving to me, please come and give to me. And please show me how I can wash other people's feet. Please show me that nothing is beneath me, but also, dear Lord, nothing is beneath you. But Lord, show us, dear Lord, that we can be the people that you want us to be. So anyway, I just hope you enjoy this day, and I just hope that you enjoy this sort of Easter period and you enjoy the sunshine. But if you are carrying stresses, if you are carrying strains, hand them back to God. Ask him to show you what is going on. Ask him to be the person that just helps you in these circumstances. Seek his wisdom. We're not meant to be so strong that we cannot cope, that we can cope with everything. We're meant to be so strong that we can hand things over to the stronger one. This is self-giving. Self-giving is not just about doing the lowliest task. Self-giving is giving of our good best things as well. So the things we hold in esteem in ourselves, like the fact that we might have positions of power, positions of authority, sometimes we have to give those too. We have to be self-giving with that. Not in the sense of, oh, I'm going to give up and I'm not going to do that role. No, because God has called you to do that. But sometimes you have to say to God, look, I'm struggling. I'm finding this hard. Give me wisdom. Give me grace. Because if you put me here to be with you and not on my own. And that, I think, is sometimes where the self-giving is not just about just sort of what we consider sacrifice and doing the menial tasks. Self-giving can mean I will hand over my big tasks and I will acknowledge that you are Lord. I will let you wash my feet. I'm not so important that you know, and I don't look at you and say, you can't wash my feet. If you say that you, because you are a self-giving God, will give yourself for me, I must learn to receive that so that I can give it as well. So anyway, I just pray. Let us be self-giving people this week. Let us give to God. Let us give to each other. Let us give to the world around us in love. God bless you all.